What's going on, guys? This is Dillard bringing you back another podcast, the Barnyard podcast number 27. Here today, I am with a special guest, Emily. Emily, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Much better that I know that we're finally getting this done after all this time.
Yeah, seriously, I probably wouldn't have been this smiley if they had gotten swept by the Mets, but they pulled it out. So
Yeah,
just
well,
forget about those first two losses.
yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. We have a lot to talk about today, and there might be some pretty spicy conversations, especially once we get to the A Rod section, because I'm going to say something. She has no idea what I'm going to say, but it's going to be fun. Um, I guess the first thing I should point out, because this was the first question that pretty much was given to us whenever I posted that tweet about ask us questions and such. I know Max said something about right now at this point in time, with the trade deadline almost coming, who would be someone that you would be willing to trade or sign for right now that would be realistic? Because you know just as good as I that Yankee Twitter loves to post these outrageous trades that are never going to happen. A lot of people think that we're entitled to Tatis or Trout or whatever the player is, when in reality it's not going to happen. So, like, the most realistic trade that you could think of right now, assuming that Clevenger is not with the Padres, because there's some news that he's like kind of with the Padres, kind of not. Bob Nightingale tweeted it, and everybody's like, well, he's not going to the Padres because he loves to jinx every tweet, basically. But, give me your thoughts about it. Like, what would you like to see personally, and what would be like a realistic trade that you think a team might accept?
I mean, to be honest, I feel that I'm not that well versed in because I don't really know prospects
Mm,
at all, besides names and obviously, Davy Garcia, Clark Schmidt, guys like that. I just know of them.
mm,
So I don't know if I'd really be able to say any trade that would actually be realistic because I
mm,
feel like that's a problem that people on Twitter
mm,
will do totally unrealistic trades because they have about the same depth of knowledge
mm,
in prospects that I do. So they throw all just the top prospects together and they think it's going to get them a stud.
mm,
But even with that being said, even if I did, I don't know if I would really trade for anybody. Like people want to freak out and
mm,
think that, oh, the team's not doing that great now, that means that we have to make a move, this team sucks, when it's just like, no, the team knows that they're going to make the playoffs, that if
mm,
they just play 500 ball, they're going to make the playoff spot. And
mm,
who cares where they land in
mm.
those 16 teams as far as the seeding is concerned. So they're just playing as best they can by resting guys. So I honestly don't think they need anybody. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but where?
Mm,
We're going to get another outfielder.
mm.
We have 10 outfielders. We're going to get another pitcher. It's like people think that if we lose a few games in a row or we lose, this pitcher does bad, gets blown up, they want to sell the farm or they want to trade everybody away and think that it's going to fix it. But it's not the way the game works.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you. And for those who don't know Emily, you definitely should follow her regardless, because she's one of the best Yankee fans out there. But she's also one of the most
Yeah.
realistic fans. Like, she's not one of those that's going to freak out or give you a 500 word essay, MLA paragraph, some sort of document the size of the Declaration of Independence on why the Yankees are going to fail. They're not going to win number 28. They're not going to the postseason over one game. You know how many times? I mean, I'm sure you know how many times we saw this just from the last like 2 days or so. Like, especially after they got swept in the doubleheader on Friday, it was like the world was crawling down. Like, it was completely falling apart. And you probably didn't watch the last podcast. I actually uploaded a podcast. This podcast will go up on Monday, but on Sunday, today's Sunday, I uploaded a podcast with my co-host, and we were talking about the whole dumb debate. It was way worse. It was 1,000 times worse than the people who were claiming that Ford should be over Voit. It was people that were saying that Kratz should actually start over Sanchez, and then Kratz has basically done nothing. I mean, the one thing I can say about Kratz that looked good was that him and Davy Garcia seem to be interlocked together. Like, they seem to work good together. That's the one thing that I do like moving forward with Kratz, is that they know each other. That's why they refer to each other as the son and father. As cringy as that may sound, at the end of the day, it just kind of symbolizes just how compact the relationship is and their bond together, which can go a long way. I mean, I know a lot of people tend to like, you're on the analytical side of things, you're all about stats, or if you don't like stats, you're just on the average and that's it. But I also do firmly believe that at the end of the day, even though I'm a big stat nerd, I know you like stats a lot too, chemistry goes a long way. I do believe in that. But at the end of the day, I would never in a million years suggest that Kratz ever start over Sanchez. I remember when people last year were hinting at the idea of Romine starting over Sanchez, and back then I was like, are you kidding me? Are you brain dead? This cannot be a real discussion. And then now comes out, so it's like 1,000 times worse than the whole Romine versus Sanchez debate. And it's like, I don't even know why I have to sit here, have a podcast with my friend, and talk about this for 20 minutes. It's ridiculous. Like, I don't mind Sanchez having occasional days off. You know, not everybody's, going to be Pete Alonso last season where he played pretty much every game throughout the entire season. Especially this Yankee team is not that fortunate because, made out of broken glass, basically, which, we can get more into that. But especially after that grand slam from Gary, which he needed. And you also know Greg Bird, the resurgence wagon. Me and him have been having so much fun today with Hicks getting that big home run in the first game, and then Gary Sanchez getting a grand slam. Him and I have been having a blast and giving people shit for doubting Hicks, and especially for doubting Gary Sanchez, because apparently Kratz is Babe Ruth and Gary Sanchez is like the bottom of the catching bowl. You know what I mean? It's just, it makes no sense. It really doesn't.
No, and people just, I feel like it's and I don't mean to insult anybody here, but it's just a fundamental lack of understanding of the game is where it really comes down to that. Believe me, I get it. Gary is struggling big time. He's having a really, really tough time. He had struggled with injury last year. Now this year he's having a tough time getting going, but it's really strange to me that people spend so much attention, and they pay so much attention to the sport, and they watch and they follow every day, but they seemingly have a disconnect with it where, first of all, they fail more than they succeed. And obviously he's failing at a pretty high level, but you have to leave him in. They know what he's capable of, and he knows what he's capable of. So taking him out doesn't make it to put someone in who hits like Gary's hitting, like lifetime. Kratz doesn't have any potential. Romine didn't have any potential. They're good. Kratz is old now, but Romine's a good defensive catcher. He got a starting job in another place, but you have to ride with Gary. He's only 27. If he were like 32, then maybe it's like, all right, this guy's now coming to the end of his prime. Maybe it's not going to get much better from here on out, but he is going to get better. So there's no reason for Boone, especially in this season and especially in that lineup. That's another thing that people seem to sort of forget, that this lineup is so stacked, even when guys are down, that it's okay to keep Gary in and give him the at-bats and let him take some cuts up there and let him see some pitches, because the Yankees are able to win games even if he's slumping big time, obviously. So why sit him? Why punish him? And Boone can make some questionable moves, but I really love that today Boone showed Gary and the fans that, look, I believe in you. That I didn't put Kratz up there. Kratz didn't want to be up there either. I can fucking guarantee it. So Gary put the bat in Gary's hands, and what did he do? He did what Gary does. He hit the ball 450 feet, won the game. But that's always going to be how it is. People watch a sport that is a slow burn, and they treat it as a, what have you done for me lately, in an instant gratification sport, like as if it's hockey, football, or basketball, which is odd.
Yeah, those are good points. I actually said this in my other podcast today or yesterday, that it's funny how people always don't want to look at the larger sample sizes. They always want to look at the smaller sample sizes. But the first minute that I say Gary Sanchez is above league average in OBP, slugging, WOBA, and WRC plus in the last 10 games. Now I would say in the last 12 games. That doesn't mean anything, but Kratz gets one hit and he's equivalent to Barry Bonds in the flesh. I will never understand that thought process. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna help you out with the small sample size argument, but you're kind of turning it against you. It's hypocrisy at the end of the day. I don't get it.
And that's why people, and it's always the Venn diagram of people who love small sample sizes and people who love the eye test is a circle, right? So, and there's I guess it's like a cognitive dissonance there, because they want the small sample size. So the funny thing about people like that is that, if anything, that proves why the eye test is just garbage, because what you just showed was like two similar scenarios where in a small sample size, this guy does well or does poorly out of his whole career, Gary. And then this guy does well for a short period of time, but his whole career is trash. Mm-hmm. That they're only remembering one or the other because they look at this player favorably. So their memory only remembers the good things. Mm-hmm. And then they look at Gary, they're waiting for him to fail, which that is always such a funny, like, fake analyst thing to me, because the odds are in the favor of a player failing, right? It's a game of failure. They're all going to fail more times than they succeed. Mm-hmm. So when people root for failure in a player like Stanton or a player like Gary, it's going to happen more often than not, mm-hmm. but it happened more often than not with Jeter too. Mm-hmm. But it's all about what we remember and our perception. And that's why people who think eye test rules reign supreme, it's like, well, you're proving right now that it's total garbage because it's all based on what your perception of this player is, mm-hmm. and it's going to dictate how you view them and how you remember them.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good example. I talked to you know who Go DJ is.
Yeah.
I also had a podcast with him not too long ago, and we talked about Gio Urshela. And I called Gio Urshela, at least last year, I called him the International Man of Mystery. Good old Austin Powers reference for those who haven't seen it. But it's the reason that, he makes so many highlights and fooled people. But, now I'm so glad that outs above average is a thing and then the updated stats or the updated analytics to DRS and UZR showed that, Gio Urshela was one of the better defenders in the league. But still, it was kind of like the whole eye test thing. It's like people remember the highlights. They'll remember the highlights, but they don't remember all the plays where they're butchering, basically routine plays. And it also doesn't help that we were so used to a guy as awful as Miguel Andujar at third. So it could seem like that anybody, even sometimes maybe Rafael Devers, could be possibly better than Miguel Andujar at the hot corner.
Right, because the same thing that, and I even fall victim to it, even though we know Andujar is a terrible defender, but I could not recall a single play that was great, that I was like, whoa, Andujar. Mm-hmm. All I remember are bad plays. Mm-hmm. Do I remember like exactly the ones? No, I don't, but that's all my brain can just keep inside because I don't really care about the times that he did well because I think that he's shitty, so.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very good point. Another question I have for you. I know this was actually more directed to me, but obviously because you're on the podcast too, I want to get your thoughts and opinions too. If you had to choose between Luke Voit or Pete Alonso, who are you going with?
Voit.
And in your opinion, why would you go with Voit?
Well, to be fair, I haven't looked at Alonso's. I don't remember what his slash line was last year, but mm-hmm. Voit gets on base a lot, and mm-hmm. getting on base is the name of the game. Mm-hmm. So I'll go with the guy that is consistently getting on base and he's improving. So I think that it can only go up from here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I actually, before we did the podcast, I went through each individual number for career numbers because I'm more about, the large sample size and the small sample size like we talked about earlier. But it's honestly like, even regardless of who you pick between Alonso or Voit, I personally would still pick Voit just because of, especially this year, he's top 2% in barrel percentage. And even though Alonso was better in barrel percentage last year, Voit was still only 6% behind him, which isn't like the biggest notable difference. Like you said, Voigt's going to walk more. I had been screaming from the top of my lungs for weeks. I was like, put Voit in the leadoff position. Put him in there. He's good at what he does. He's going to get on base. And, I've said this a million times. It's like a broken record. But I would not be opposed to someone like DJ batting, in the cleanup spot or batting in the 3-hole. Just because this guy batted in, I know RBIs are more of a chance stat.
Right.
But he batted in over 100 RBIs in the leadoff position last year. That's insanity. Can you imagine how many RBIs he would have batted in last year if he was in a position where he got more opportunities to score in runs? So that's why I've always been like a big supporter of Hicks leading off more, and especially Voit leading off more because, he's elite. He's going to get on base a lot. He's always going to have a high on base percentage. And, what more can you say? Because I always bring up this, the same situation where assuming in a scenario where we have a healthy Judge and we don't have to worry about Judge. Judge is always playing elite baseball no matter what. You get Voit or you get Hicks, to walk on a leadoff, and then Judge bombs a 2-run homer. would you rather, and a lot of people don't appreciate walks, and that's the thing I've always had to like kind of drill in people's head a little bit, is like walks are important. They can be just as valuable. They mean just as much as a single with nobody on base. It's pretty much the exact same thing. So, you know what I mean? It wouldn't really make any sense for you to say that walks are meaningless, even though, like I said, that's just one example of many. Voit or Hicks gets on base and then Judge pops a 2-run homer. How many times has Judge done that? Numerous occasions, more than I can possibly fathom or calculate in my head. But I guess where I'm kind of going with here is it's obviously neither are great defensively, especially Voit. Voit has his troubles. I don't really think I have to go through his DRS and UZR. It's pretty bad. To be fair, Alonso is pretty bad too. Their outs above average aren't great either. They're in the negatives. But it's very, very, very similar. Like their stat lines are similar. Like, for example, their WOBA is only like a .006 difference, or their WRC plus is only like a 3 difference, or their F4 is only like a .2 difference. Like, these guys are very similar. I think they're very similar players, and obviously they play first base, so that makes a lot of sense too. And, they happen to be both similar in the sense that they are dreadful defensively. I love Luke Voit. I've been a huge supporter of Luke Voit since he came up here, but I would be lying to you if I said that Voit or Alonso, for that matter, were anything more than below average defenders.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair assessment. And thank you for giving me the numbers and telling me how close they are. So with that being said, why wouldn't I ride with Voit? You know what I mean? That if they're that similar up to this point, obviously even up to this point, their career numbers are still a fairly small sample size in the grand scheme. They've only been playing for what? They each have a full season under their belt, maybe 2 or a half a season. So like, I'll stick with Voit. I'm not going to, give any other reason besides he's just my guy, that if they're that close, then I'll stick with him. And it is really funny when people, they want to say like Alonso, like their defense sucks, like, oh, Voigt's defense sucks. And I actually just talked about this on my podcast this week, that it's always funny to me that the guy that can hit really well, they try to hide him at first base. And that's always such an interesting sort of move in my head, because it's like, well, you can't really hide a guy at first base. They're involved in every single play, but at this level, most of the throws are on the money. But where else are you going to put him? It's like when you look around the league, there are great defensive first basemen like Matt Olson from the A's. He's unbelievable, but there's not that many. And there haven't been that many in Yankees history either. Like the ones that everyone thinks is great, if you look at the numbers, it's like they weren't really that great. They were decent, but our memory remembers them as amazing because we remember them, making Derek Jeter look really good or making A-Rod look really good a few times. But first baseman is always the guy that it's like, well, we're not going to put this guy in the outfield because he sucks at defense. We're not going to put him in any other position on the field. Yeah, guess we'll put him at first base. So you want that guy to be a slugger.
Definitely. And you do make a very valid point. There are very few first basemen, like pretty much the only one I could name off the top of my head that I would consider an elite defensive first base is pretty much only Matt Olson right off the top of my head. And maybe Anthony Rizzo, maybe Freeman. But like there's not too many first basemen that are like noticeably known for their defense. They are pretty much all known for their offense. I mean, Rizzo, Freeman, one guy that I really like, I know he kind of switched in between first and second, but I think a guy like Max Muncy is incredibly underrated. A lot of people don't give him the time of day because I think he's overshadowed by what Bellinger has done for the Dodgers.
Right, and he's like a DJ LeMahieu kind of guy that he's a stud player, but he's a utility player because he can play multiple positions. Not a utility, I guess that's not the right word, because Torreyes was a utility player, off the bench, but kind of is, because it's like, oh, DJ LeMahieu, like when I was making, we made our own little all-star teams, and I was considering putting LeMahieu in, but I was like, what position do I put him in? He plays first, he plays second, he plays third. Like, he's just that guy. It's just like Muncy. And just to bring it back to the OBP conversation, that I don't understand why people have such a hard time accepting that on-base percentage is important, walks are important, that it's such a shame. I was just talking with my co-host John the other day about that, people are so wrapped up in batting average. They're holding on to it for dear life. That if only we can go back in time and shift the focus to on-base percentage and have that be the number that people had then followed for all these years. First of all, the game would have probably evolved a bit quicker than it did. took 150 years for the game to start evolving based on numbers, but then it would have made the switch to analytics for more fans, I think, a lot easier. And I just don't get why people can't make the connection that getting on base is what matters. Who cares if, okay, this guy's hitting 250, but his on base percentage is hovering near, between 380 and 400. So he's still getting on base. What's the problem? And they have no answer for that.
And
I don't know why.
I've made that argument about Hicks lately. I know it's changed now. I don't know what it is now. But in the last 2 weeks, I mean, Hicks has either been 4th in BB percentage or 6th in BB percentage. And I'm like, how are you going to fault the guy for walking? And I actually mentioned you on the podcast the other day because you said this directly. You basically took the words out of my mouth before I even was doing the podcast. But I know you said something along the lines of, how is it Hicks' fault that, he's not getting many pitches to hit? They're not giving him many pitches, and it seems like Hicks is one of those guys that he walks so much that, everybody they don't have an easy ride. They might have an easy ride in the sense that his average is low, of course, getting him to ground out into the shift or something like that. But outside of the shift and outside of the average, he's elite. He gets on base. The pitchers know that when he comes up, he's no cheapie. You're going to have to throw strikes to get this guy out. And there's a very few amount of times it happens because it happens to everybody. Nobody's perfect in baseball. Like you said, It's a game of failures. Most people are, even the best players, even Tatis right now still fails more often than he succeeds.
Right.
But, regardless, at the end of the day, most of the time that Hicks is in that plate, in that batter's box, I'm very comfortable with him, and I don't see very many ugly swings from him. Not like I saw from, like Eric Kratz or like Eric Kratz the other day where it just kind of seemed like they were like dinosaur swings. I really don't know what was going on with Kratz. I was like, man, you could have done a little better than that. I mean, there's a handful of other players, and not even just with the Yankees, but across the league who just have atrocious swings. Like they just have atrocious, plate appearance after plate appearance after plate appearance. But Hicks is not one of those guys. I'm always comfortable with him. I always believe in the guy.
Yeah, I feel the same way, obviously. And with Hicks, it's like if he's getting on base that much and he's in the leadoff spot, his job is to get on base. And if there are people, if he's not leading off an inning and there are people on base for him, his job is to continue the inning and get to the heart of the lineup. So however he does that is fine. And like you were mentioning before, that if he's seeing the ball that well and he's walking that much, because that's what that means, he's not up there flailing. Like that was the issue with Andujar, even in 2018, that he was slugging over 500 or something like that. His OPS was over 800, but it's because his slugging was so high. His on base percentage was like 328, which is terrible. So that means that if he's not making contact, he's striking out or he's grounding out or he's, or whatever. So his production is it was sort of I don't want to say a farce. I can't really think of a better word, but it was inflated by he was just hacking up there. His walk percentage like 4%, where Hicks, should he just be swinging at every pitch then? He's getting walked. What do people want? Those at-bats, obviously, the pitcher wasn't throwing more strikes than they were throwing balls. So why should he be just swinging? So then people would then criticize him for that, Hicks looks horrible up there. It doesn't make any sense. And if walks are so overrated, like people want to say, or walks aren't that important, then maybe when the people who developed the rules for this game, they probably wouldn't have made walks not count as at-bats. Because if the batting average was the amount of hits, divided by the amount of plate appearances, then yeah, I would understand walks are shit then, but that's not how it is. So even Hicks's low batting average, it's like that's only the at-bats that batting average is from. That's not calculating how many walks he's getting, but the on-base percentage is. So who gives a shit that his batting average is whatever it was, 200, when he had a OBP over 400 a few days ago? Like, who cares?
That's a big prime example why I think average is a flawed stat, and I can't stand using average. I don't like using average even with everything else, and I especially can't stand when people use average as a standalone stat. It means nothing to me. It's like using RBIs alone. It means nothing to me. It doesn't make somebody a better player. No. DJ LeMahieu, he's going to drive in runs. If they keep him at the leadoff spot, he's going to drive in runs. If they put him in the 3-hole, he's going to drive in runs. He's not suddenly unclutch because he doesn't drive in runs. DJ is going to be DJ, and we all know he's a good contact, solid hitter. I don't really need average and RBIs to tell me that he's a good hitter. I can look at all the other portions, all the other stats, the advanced stats like, WOBA or WRC+. Those are my favorites personally. But I have a very interesting question to now give to you. Now, you pretty much have the floor on this. I will take it a step above once you finish answering the question. This was another question, but in your opinion, if A-Rod announced a comeback, would you welcome him as the Yankees DH for the rest of the season?
I think the answer there is yes, obviously. And I believe that was Kyle who asked that. So yes, Kyle, the answer to that is yes, because same thing why it's okay to keep Gary Sanchez in the lineup if he's slumping. I just want A-Rod to get those last 4 home runs. I want him to reach 700. He's sitting at 696 right now. So keep him in, let him take some hacks. If he doesn't hit a home run in his first, 10, 15, 20 at-bats, then whatever, pull him. Same nice life. But, hey, if he wanted to come back and the Yankees still had a stacked lineup and they could carry him there, why not?
Definitely. I like that. And here's where it becomes very interesting. Okay. And I'm sorry for putting you in this boat, but I want to make things controversial because it makes these podcasts fun, because then people ask questions and then it's fun. But in your humble opinion, and this probably will be the section that I post on Twitter, as long as you're okay with it.
I'm ready.
Do you think Alex Rodriguez or Derek Jeter were better in their career?
I mean, A-Rod, that's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. And, people want to think, and it always comes down to this. It's like if you don't think Jeter was the best player ever, then you hate Jeter. I don't hate Jeter. I love Jeter. Mm-hmm. I grew up watching the Yankees. I became a Yankee fan because when they started winning championships, I was like 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't come from a family where, my dad isn't a big baseball fan. Like, he's a sports fan, but he's more into college sports from where he went to school. So it's not like I come from a family of Yankee fans. I just started watching baseball. So I started watching the Yankees because they were good. And I love Derek Jeter. Mm-hmm. I obviously love A-Rod more. But that aside, looking at it objectively, they were both great. They're both all-time greats. They're both Hall of Famers. But there's no real argument that is based on tangible evidence. Mm-hmm. Then besides, like, people want to say, oh, well, A-Rod, Jeter was a winner. He was the captain. It's like, all right, but what did he do in his career? He was still a great offensive shortstop, but Alex Rodriguez is arguably, next to probably Honus Wagner, the greatest offensive shortstop of all time. And the only thing that will keep him off from going over Honus, besides the PEDs, is that he played third base for the last 12 years of his career. Why? Because he wanted to win. And isn't that funny that a criticism of guys like Trout or Machado is that, oh, they just went to those teams because they don't want to be paid attention to. They don't want to win. They're not winners. And, a big thing that people love to say, Derek Jeter was a winner. That's why he's, the all-time great. But A-Rod is not added to that conversation, despite the fact that he left Texas where he was a fucking star. He was a stud. That team was trash. So he was far and away the best player on the team. I mean, he was far and away the best player in the league at the time. And he came to New York and he said, I'll play third. I don't care. Wherever you have a spot for me, I'll play. He didn't come in and say, hey, I'm playing shortstop, even though he was the best shortstop defensively in the league too at the time. He came and was willing to change positions from his natural position to a new one, which we don't know how that affected his head. Besides coming to New York, the pressure, highest paid player in the league, all these things on him, and having to switch positions. And people who think that is super easy for guys, it's not. It's not as easy as it looks. So we don't know how that affected him and how he could have played if he had always just stayed a shortstop. But even with that, he still came through more than people give him credit for. And I think that anyone who tries to argue that Jeter was the better player, did Jeter have the better career overall that is, as far as team stuff is concerned, if you want to include that? Because Jeter didn't win any of those World Series on his own. Mm-hmm. But if you want to say, oh, well, Jeter's got 5 rings, it's like, okay. So I mean, there's no, it's like you can't argue with that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you can't argue with because it's true. It's just someone who wants to believe that's the end all be all for a team sport that couldn't be more of a team sport. They just don't want to listen to reason. And anyone can fight me on this if they want to, but A-Rod had the better career. I mean, it's objectively true.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, like A-Rod was elite at shortstop, and I will defend you, and I will say that if there was a different circumstance where we could have obviously both A-Rod and Jeter on the same team, but A-Rod's playing shortstop over Derek Jeter, I would gladly take that. And I don't care if I receive criticism for that or not. Alex Rodriguez was, 20 times the shortstop that Derek Jeter was. And I know the big thing is a lot of people don't like analytics, especially defensive analytics, because they don't believe that Derek Jeter had basically, let me go through his numbers specifically. So I don't.
You mean the negative 152?
Yeah, so I don't list off like false stats. Like they don't want to believe that he had a negative 162 DRS or a negative 66.1 UZR. Even though there's like countless times where I remember he would drop a ball. Do you remember that one easy routine play that he dropped in Anaheim? There's things like that I remember from Jeter. I also remember the diving plays, but that's the thing. Like I think the difference between a guy like Simmons and you know how elite Simmons is. I mean, I think we could both agree that at this point, Simmons could get in the Hall of Fame just from defense alone.
He should.
Simmons has enough range where he doesn't need to make things look fancy. And I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy those plays from Jeter. I absolutely love those plays. You know, a lot of them were really tough plays, don't get me wrong. But a guy like Simmons doesn't even have to do that. He can just get the ball cleanly, field it cleanly, get into a good position and throw it without having to leap it like it's a routine play. And that's what sets, a guy like Simmons different from Jeter. I know we're not talking about Simmons, but it's just kind of the range. And, shortstop is a very, very demanding position. Very demanding. And outside of the defense, I don't even think it's close offensively, to be honest with you. Because, I'm going to name off stats and people don't have to like them if they don't like to. People are going to always, stay ignorant. You can't change ignorant people. No. But, I mean, Alex Rodriguez had a 113.7 F4 over Jeter's 73. Or, Jeter was a 360 WOBA, 119 WRC career hitter. And then there's A-Rod, 394 or 395, 141. Like, it's night and day difference. It's huge. Jeter was never a guy who's going to give you a high slugging. But Alex Rodriguez, he was going to give you a damn good high slugging, I think the one thing that would really benefit Jeter, though, is the only thing that I would say is similar between Jeter and A-Rod is their OBP. Both of them are going to get on base regardless. But I'm not going to sit here and say Derek Jeter is better just because he had more hits than A-Rod. He had a 310 average. His average was what? His career average was .015 points higher, which is, isn't that big of a difference if we're being honest. Jeter had how many? 1,311 RBIs. If you want to use the RBI logic,
A-Rod had over
2,000.
Yeah.
Basically 800 more RBIs almost than Jeter.
And he played on much shittier teams for a few years. When he was with Texas, the teams were horrible. Mm-hmm. And the thing with DRS and those defensive stats is, like you were saying, it's about the range. And that's what people, because they don't really want to learn about it, but they just want to hate it, because that doesn't mean that he wasn't making necessarily a shitload of errors. And that's why they can't make the connection, because they're like, I watch Jeter every day. It's not like he was booting balls daily. And it's like, no, he wasn't. But those defensive stats they're taking into account the player's range. Mm-hmm. So a ball that Jeter isn't getting to in the hole goes down as a hit in the book. But there are plenty of other shortstops at this level in the league that are able to convert that into an out, and it's a fucking ground out. Mm-hmm. So that affects Jeter negatively, because at that level, there are guys who can make those plays. So it's not that he was just making errors and was like a bumbling fool out there. He wasn't. And he made great plays, but he didn't have the range for the position that other guys at the same level at the same time and now since have. So should we not count that against him now that we're starting to, the defensive stats are starting to evolve, and we're starting to analyze them more because we're taking into account things like, okay, the infield is the same exact size no matter where you go, no matter what stadium you play in. So all these guys are able to have this amount of range between their positions, and this guy has this amount of range, a shorter range. We shouldn't punish that guy because at this level, other guys can make that play. Mm-hmm. That should just be like, oh, it's a hit because the official score said it's a hit. It's like, all right, sure, but he should have got that ball. He should have been able to get to that ball, and he didn't. Mm-hmm. So that should just be like, oh, who cares? No.
And I'm glad that you brought up errors because I've used this example multiple times on Twitter. One of my favorite examples is from 2018, Matt Chapman, who we know is a defensive god. He is so exciting. He's one of my favorite players in the league to watch. In 2018, he, among all qualified third basemen, had the second most committed errors. And I'm like, does that make him suck? Does that mean he's mediocre? He's terrible? Absolutely not. Chapman completely swept the floor in both ultimate zone rating and defensive runs saved. Even Arenado wasn't even close to the guy. And a lot of people love to praise Arenado, which we will get to that in just a second because I would love to hear your opinion on this because, you know, I think personally Chapman is a better player than Arenado. But it's just like I can't stand when people use like the same basic stats. You know, it goes back to average and RBIs. Like, I can't stand that. Why are you not looking at the bigger picture, like OBP, slugging? Do these things not matter to you too? Does the WOBA or WRC plus or, you know, the amount of wins that they're contributing to their team known as WAR, do these things not matter to people? It's kind of like on the flip side of defense. Do things like ultimate zone rating not matter or how many, you know, defensive runs these guys saved? I don't really care how many errors. You know, Matt Chapman, like I said, second most errors in the league in 2018, still cleaned the floor, swept every third baseman in the league in DRS and UZR, and it wasn't even close.
And especially since errors are at the discretion of a scorer. So there are some obvious errors that there, you know, 30 official scorers across the league are going to mark that as an error. But there are some that it's like, all right, this could, you know, this guy said it's an error, but this guy might have marked that down as a hit or whatever. So it's like, are we really going to just take errors and hold it against the player when it's someone else's discretion, but also that they're part of the game? That's the thing. Like, people, you know, I guess the theme of this episode is it's like nobody's perfect. No one in this game is perfect because the repetition wears you down. There's thousands of opportunities, thousands of chances, they wear you down. The idea that someone over the course of, even if they don't even play a full season, but we'll say over the course of 162 games, we really expect them not to make any errors. Mm-hmm. Of course they're going to, but that doesn't mean that they're a bad defender. Obviously, if it's on a level like, you know, Andujar, then it's like, all right, he kind of sucks, but it's more than just his errors. Mm-hmm. It's things he's not getting to. It's so just like with strikeouts. And it's funny because if you know, Reggie Jackson is a Yankee fan god, right? But I'm pretty sure he holds the MLB record for most strikeouts. No one gives a shit about that because it didn't matter. Who cared how he produced an out? Same thing with like Chapman. Yeah, he's going to make errors, but who cares? He's making so many amazing plays that are out of his zone that would be hits elsewhere. Mm-hmm. That who gives a shit if he makes an error or has the most errors because he's still saving the most runs.
Mm-hmm. It's honestly insanity. Just giving Chapman more credit. It's honestly insanity how strong his instincts are. Like, how good of a defender he is. He's not just good at what he does. He's one of those players that you can't just simply teach that. There's only a few type of players that can do something like Chapman can. To be fair, Arenado or, you know, Simmons. And it's crazy that, you know, I referenced Simmons earlier, but even as god tier of a defender Chapman is, there is nobody in the league from the infield to the outfield that is even close to Simmons. He's ridiculous. That's what I said earlier. He might go down into the Hall of Fame by being just a ridiculous defender alone, not because of his bat, by his defensive skills. I think he should for sure. You know, he's basically equivalent to Ozzie Smith. You know, he's not going to do too much for the bat, but he's going to make a ridiculous impact on the field. And I've always been a huge supporter of defense because I think defense is more important than people take it for granted for, especially when you have, you know, athletics. You know, you have Simeon and you have Chapman, you have Olsen. Like, that is a ridiculous infield right there. That's going to save you a ton of runs. You know, I remember last year specifically when the Yankees played the Athletics, the 3-game series in the Bronx. One of the games, the Athletics, they saved a run because Matt Olson is going to be Matt Olson and makes a ridiculous diving catch, diving on the ground, next to second base before it reaches the outfield to drive in a run. And it's just like people don't think of these little things. Like they always want to look at the errors or the fielding percentage, but they don't keep in mind that a guy like Chapman is doing this on a regular basis, and he may not be always producing with the bat because obviously no one's perfect. But, if he's not doing anything with the bat on any given day, if he's at least saving a run or two, I can't complain personally because he's still helping and contributing to the team winning the game, even though it's not with his bat.
I agree, especially when it's on the elite level that we allow pitchers, we give pitchers credit. They only play one aspect of the game. Mm-hmm. We give DHs a fuck ton of credit. They only play one aspect of the game. So why should someone who is an elite level fielder, especially when, we don't know with Chapman yet, the track is there, but especially someone with Simmons who's coming towards, he's closer to the end of his career, that we know at this point, he's an elite level defender as far as every Major League Baseball player in history is concerned. Why should he not be recognized for that? Edgar Martinez is in the Hall of Fame, played one side, he was a one-sided player. Why shouldn't Simmons? There is already precedence too, because Brooks Robinson he got in because of his defense, basically. I don't think he was much of a hitter, but he was so incredible in his career that people were like, how can we not get this guy in there? So I think the only thing that'll hurt Simmons, and thankfully fans don't vote on it, is because people think that, oh, he's not as good as everyone says because I've never heard of him. And it's like, well, yeah, no shit, dickhead. You live in New York. Why would you have heard of this guy? If you're not watching Angels games and you don't live in Southern California, why is he going to be marketed to you? He's not. But people are like, I've never heard of him, so that means he sucks. And it's like, okay.
I actually made this point, and you actually commented on it. It was never to be intended as a shot at Tatis, because I love Tatis. Tatis is one of my favorite players in the league, and, obviously he's not better than a guy like Trout, but I think at this moment in time, he is the face of baseball, just also with how good he is on the field, and just his personality clicks with everybody. Everybody can relate to the guy. But it's honestly a cardinal sin that guys like Mike Yaz or Brandon Lowe or Kyle Lewis even, it's like anyone who's not a Mariners fan and so is from Seattle, the majority of these people, like 99.9% of people, have no clue who Kyle Lewis is. And it's a shame because he's killing it this year. It's also Brandon Lowe. It's like you would expect more Yankee fans to know who Brandon Lowe is, considering he's playing for the team that is in first place in the AL East right now. And no, it seems like nobody is giving a shit about what Lowe has done for the Rays. It's incredible. And, I've made this point. A lot of people are like, well, it's because of Tatis' personality. And it's like, well, if we don't ever spotlight these guys, if we don't have, podcast, like, the podcast with CC Sabathia, they've had Trevor Bauer, which was incredible. Sonny Gray, I never knew how colorful his personality was until I, was listening to him on a podcast. Or someone like, Archie Bradley or, Justin Upton, just to name a few. We're not going to know how these guys click as far as their personality is concerned until you give them the spotlight. So, like, basically where I'm trying to come from this is, like a guy like Kyle Lewis or these people that we don't know their personality, we'll never know their personality unless they gain more spotlight. And, like a guy like Tatis, he deserves it, No, I don't think anyone is gonna take that away from Tatis. Especially he got a lot of recognition after the whole let the kids play deal, with the fact that the Rangers were so pissed off that even though there's been numerous games, I could go on Baseball Reference and tell you game after game after game of teams that came back from 5, 6, 7+ run deficits. They had such a big deal with it. He's getting a lot of shit for that, which that's a whole nother story. Tatis should have never apologized. That is just dumb. That's like literally like middle school drama type of stuff. Like the dude
don't even get me started on the unwritten rules. They're all for baby. They're 99.9% of the unwritten rules are to protect baby pitchers and their feelings. That's why if the score was flip-flop there and the Rangers were winning by 6+ runs, would that pitcher have given, if Tatis had a 0-2 count, that pitcher's not going to throw a meatball down the center of the plate like, oh, you know what? We're winning by a lot. Let me not strike Tatis out here. Let me give him a chance. Hell no. So why should Tatis be like, you know what? Let me save Ian Gabo or whatever that pitcher's name. Let me save his feelings and not fucking hit a home run right here. Like, nah. I have a thing for the Texas Rangers. They're They're horrible. They're crybabies. Their pitchers are been crybabies for years. So yeah, unwritten rules, not.
So there's that. I think you could pretty much agree with me. Like I said, it's pretty much like a cardinal sin that guys like Brandon Lowe or Kyle Lewis is a big one that nobody outside of the Mariners know who Kyle Lewis is. Pretty much. I mean, unless you're like you and I who watch baseball, we don't just watch the Yankees. We watch everybody, and we love stats. We're so invested in these. Outside of that small portion of people, nobody knows who Kyle Lewis is. And, I would like to be someone who changes that, or I'd like, my voice or other people's voice to, somehow get enough attention that the MLB finally does something about it and starts marketing people. And people are always like, a guy like Trout's boring. And it's like, really? Are you kidding me? Like, how is Trout a boring baseball player? He's literally the greatest player that I have pretty much witnessed in my entire lifetime, outside of Barry Bonds, of course, I would say.
And also, when he gets what is he supposed to do? Because anytime these guys show any semblance of personality on the field, or look at Bryce Harper, he's always been very forthcoming with the media. The fans say that they're an asshole, and then they don't like them, and they need to shut up and stick to the sport. And so it's like it's a lose-lose. Mm-hmm. Trout is boring. He shouldn't be the face of the game. But then if he were to speak up, he'd be like Harper, and then people would hate him, universally hate him, because he has the gall to open his mouth and show his personality every now and then. So it's a lose-lose. People just, I've always felt that fans sort of, they have a weird resentment for these players because they envy their position in life, and they envy the talent that they were born with. And so it causes a lot of fans that, even though they watch constantly, that they don't want to feel like, oh, I'm not a little kid watching, that I'm going to criticize every single thing these guys do and every move they make, because I think it makes them feel better about not being that guy and not making millions and millions of dollars to play a game. So it'll never end. Even if they were to show more personality and market guys like Brendan Lowe better, fans would still have something to say, or then hate them or whatever. It's so weird.
Mm-hmm. I have two more things that I think we should definitely talk about. I'll save I think the best one for last, because we talked about it a little bit, not necessarily Arenado, but we talked a little bit about Chapman. But I think this would be a good time to also ask for your opinion on pitching wins, because if we're going to talk about RBIs and average, and we're going to talk about errors and fielding percentage, we might as well, admit that pitching wins might be the most useless stat. And I could name off several pitchers, but the one pitcher that always comes to mind when I think about pitching wins being useless, it's a common theme across MLB. You know exactly who I'm going to say.
2-time Cy Young Award winner.
Mr. Yeah. Jacob Degrom. And it's like, the dude, what was it? Was it 2018? Like, I'm usually not the biggest fan of ERA. I'm usually more about FIP. But the guy still had basically a sub-2 ERA, a little bit under a sub-2 ERA. Like, that's unheard of. The guy's pitching, how many? 200 innings that season? And it's and then you look at the FIP, and it's like all in the twos. The Sierra's in the 2. He doesn't walk anyone. The whip is in excellent condition. He strikes out a ton, walks very little, doesn't give up a lot of home runs. It's like, but oh my God, the pitching wins, they mean so much. It's just like, I don't get it. What's your opinion on pitching wins?
I am in complete agreement with you. I mean, today we had the perfect example. Davey Garcia was lights out in his debut. He was unbelievable, but he didn't get the win because when he left the game, I think that tied, or they were losing or something. So he gets a no decision. Does that negate? Because he has now a 0-0 record. But if you look at his stat line, I'm sure it looks great. So that should count against him, because the team didn't score runs and didn't take advantage of this lights out performance that their pitcher was providing for them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the wins are just a ridiculous stat. They have no control over it. They don't, especially now in both leagues, they don't hit. Mm-hmm. So we're going to punish. You can't win a game without scoring runs. Mm-hmm. So we're going to punish the guy whose job it is to prevent the other team from scoring. Mm-hmm. If his team doesn't score, why? It makes no sense. Mm-hmm.
It's not fair to penalize, especially a guy like Degrom like that, when he plays on a team that, they look good on paper, but, then we see what they just did against the Yankees this series, and then we've seen what the Mets have done year after year, where it's like, even if Degrom pitches, a 8-inning shutout game, and then they go to a reliever, like Seth Lugo or Edwin Diaz. I know Edwin Diaz has been, he's either spot on or he's a big hit and miss. He blew it today against the Yankees. But more of the point is that Degrom could pitch the best game of his life, and then the Mets literally don't score any runs, and then Seth Lugo or Edwin Diaz or someone who's really solid doesn't have their A game, or any other reliever for that matter, on the Mets Mets bullpen, and it completely ruins the entire game. It makes Degrom's performance look like it didn't mean anything because he has a loss next to it, even though he pitched 8 perfect innings of shutout baseball, and that's why I've never liked pitching wins. Like, you could literally have an 0-20 record. You can have an 0-20 record, which I don't know how that would be possible. But if Jacob Degrom somehow had an 0-20 record, but he's still producing at a high level where he's, a Cy Young from back-to-back seasons, I really don't care that he's 0-20. I'm going to look at the offense. It's all in the offense at that point.
Right. I mean, Luis Castillo right now on the Reds, I believe he was, as of the other day anyway, he's 0-4. But he has like a sub, he's got like a 2, around a 2 FIP, and he's pitching out of his mind, but his team is not winning the games that he's pitching. So what is he going to do? And also, we don't hold a win-loss record against hitters. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at how many MVPs Trout has racked up. A-Rod won an MVP when he was in Texas. He should have won too, but I digress. And the team was winning 70 games a year. We were able to, I mean, not everybody. People want to use team stats to try to talk about why a player is good or not, but neither here nor there. We don't hold that against the batter. Mm-hmm. So why should we hold it against the pitcher then? Mm-hmm. The batter, the hitters are in just as much of a position, maybe less, a little less so because there's more of them, but they're responsible for winning or not winning, because like we were just talking about, you have to score runs. So it should be one or the other. They're both two halves of a whole, defense and the offense. So if we're going to hold the wins and losses against the pitcher, then we should hold the wins and losses against the team too, regardless of how they do on an individual level. But we shouldn't, actually. I'm just saying that for a point. They're both, that would be ridiculous, but just doesn't. It's another one of these cognitive dissonance.
That's a bad idea, Emily, because then you're gonna fuel the fire for people who think pitching wins matter.
Well, no, yeah. The disclaimer, everybody. I didn't actually mean that we should do it. I'm just saying that if we're gonna do it, you should be consistent.
Yeah, for sure. And here's the last thing I want to talk to you about, because this was the most interesting conversation. Because it seems like a lot of people have different opinions. It seems like the analytical community, as far as I'm concerned, usually goes with Chapman over Arenado, but anybody else who isn't into analytics always goes with Arenado. What is your opinion? Who do you think is a more productive third baseman, both offensively and defensively combined?
Well, it's funny. I was actually speaking with Max Greenfield about this, because he's my go-to analytics guy. That he's awesome. He helps me understand and sort of like form opinions on things. Not that he's influencing my opinion, but I'll be able to read the stats and look at things, and he'll help me parse it out, basically. And from what I was seeing in the outs above average and the DRS, now that they are calculating it more similarly to outs above average, that Arenado, I mean, I think people think of Arenado first because he's been in the league for significantly more time. So of course people are going to say, well, Arenado, because they've been watching him or hearing about him for now, like 5 years, 6 years, where Chapman has got maybe 2 years. But Arenado I think has a leg up as far as offense is concerned at this point, but the defense, Chapman's defense is, and believe it or not, I mean, but people listening is so much better than Arenado, especially considering how few innings he has in comparison to Arenado, that these stats are cumulative, that I think that it negates Arenado's slight edge in offense. So I'm going to pick Chapman.
Really? You're going to pick Chapman?
Yeah.
Awesome. I think you probably figured I was going to pick him. The one thing that I always think about is that it's kind of hard to compare both of them in some ways, just because Arenado has so many more years under his belt. So Chapman doesn't have as large as a sample size as Arenado does. But even with that in mind, at least since, Matt Chapman coming up in 2017 with the Athletics, since 2017 to 2020 now, he saved at least Arenado saved 50 runs since 2017, and Matt Chapman has saved 82. Like, that is a colossal difference. And keep in mind, Chapman is first in the league in DRS, and Arenado is second. So that also just tells you not only is that such a massive difference, but it also just tells you how elite both Arenado and Chapman are defensively, because the third guy next to him, can you guess who is third in DRS behind Arenado with 28?
What is this all active?
Yeah, this is like among no. You're talking about players that are still in the league, basically?
Or are you just talking about a third baseman?
Just a third baseman. He's still in the league too.
Oh my God. No, I don't know who. I can't even think of it.
Evan Longoria.
Oh my God, I never would have thought of him. Wow. He must have had oh wait, no, it's a cumulative stat. Never mind. I was gonna say he must have had so many more and then just been dipping the last few years, but I remember him 2008 when he was really, really good.
And then we like jump to UZR and it's like, Arenado's 26, and then Chapman, it's like 37.4. It's just like, what more can you say about Chapman other than like he's not even just elite defensively. He's so far above every other third baseman in the league defensively, and it's not even close. It's not even debatable. Like, if we were debating like the whole, like what we were talking about earlier with Voit and Alonso, like personally, I would always go with Voit. Even I might be a little biased. I'll admit I might be a little biased, but at least the common theme with Alonso and Voit is that their career numbers so far are very similar. Like, their WOBA's pretty similar, their WRC plus, their F4, they're just very similar players all in all. But you can't even sit here and try and tell me that Arenado's a better defender in the last 3 years. I will literally just sit there and point and laugh at you, because I can't take you seriously if you don't think these proven stat. I mean, honestly, Chapman is one of those few players that, even if we didn't have these stats, or even if I was using the eye test, I would probably still firmly believe that this guy was an elite defender from the eye test, because every time I watch the guy, he makes a play and he never butchers any play. And, like we talked about the range, he just gets to the ball like no other defender in the league can. And I guess the one thing that I will say that's positive about Arenado, I will give Arenado this, is, and I will give him a takeaway because of this same thing. But the one positive thing that Arenado has going for him defensively is he does play in Coors Field. So it might be a little bit more of a challenge playing Coors Field. But at the same time, Coors Field's going to hurt him because of WRC+. For those who don't know what WRC+ is, it's basically, it's basically a stat that is adjusted by each individual ballpark. So basically, a guy that's playing at Coors Field, like Arenado, he's going to be hurt severely by it because, the air resistance. I don't think I have to express and explain the science behind Coors Field. The amount of home runs and the amount of triples and the amount of doubles that are given up every single year basically lead the majors every single season. Right. But then, you compare that to a guy like Chapman, who plays in a pitchers-friendly park in the Oakland Coliseum. And the big thing that always gets to me whenever I'm always talking about Arenado and Chapman is their home-away splits. Arenado is a stud at Coors Field. He's an absolute wrecking ball at Coors Field. Nobody can take that away from him. But on the road, he's only a 107 WRC plus hitter, which is only a little bit above the league average for WRC plus. Like 100 WRC plus is basically average, right at average. Right. He's only above league average by 7%, basically. And then, you take his OPS into consideration at Coors. It's a 995 at Coors or a 617 slugging. That's absurd. But then you go to his away splits, and he's slugging 470 and has a 791 OPS. Like, that is a huge, drastic, difference in OPS and slugging. It's the same with, OBP, even though I don't like average. It's the same. The average is, a 263 to a 324. It's a massive difference. And then I go to someone like Chapman, and then I look at, his road home splits, and it's actually interesting because Chapman has a better WRC plus, a 138, than Arenado does at Coors Field, which is very interesting to me because Chapman also plays at a pitchers-friendly ballpark, one of the more pitchers-friendly ballparks in the league. And then you look at, Chapman's away splits. He's a 116 WRC plus hitter, which is better than Arenado, his WOBA is better. His OPS is better. Pretty much every stat along that line is better than Arenado on the road. So that's like the whole big thing. Like when everybody always asks, who's the better third baseman between Arenado and Chapman? It's no disrespect to Arenado. If I sat here and told you I didn't like watching Arenado on a regular basis, I'd be lying to you. I love Arenado. He's an exciting player. He's good for baseball. But if I'm going to sit here and try and compare the two, and you're asking me an honest opinion on who I think is better, it's got to be Chapman, because he's still performing better than Arenado at a ballpark that is a pitcher's-friendly ballpark opposed to Coors Field, which is the most hitters-friendly park in the league. It's not even close. And Arenado struggles on the road compared to Chapman, who does fairly well on the road. Right. So that's pretty much all I have on that.
And just like much like the Jeter and A-Rod conversation, not that I'm comparing these two to Jeter and A-Rod directly, but it's always a weird thing that it's like, just because we both agree that Chapman is a better player than Arenado because his defense is insane, that doesn't mean that we think Arenado sucks. Mm-hmm. Just like thinking A-Rod was a better player doesn't mean that I think Jeter sucks. Mm-hmm. It just, that's how good Chapman is, or that's how good A-Rod was, is that these players, Arenado, Jeter, they are elite. They're elite. That Arenado is probably on a Hall of Fame track himself. But so think of how good Arenado is, and that Chapman is better than him. So it's not a discredit to Arenado to say, hey, this guy's the real deal. He's unreal. It just means that that's how good Chapman is. But people want to take it like, oh, if you think this player's better than that one, then you must mean that this guy sucks. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be so black and white.
And it kind of goes back to our argument about, like Brandon Lowe or Kyle Lewis. Arenado, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think this is really something that's debatable. It's pretty obvious, common sense, but Arenado is getting regular attention from MLB, whereas Chapman, he gets it every now and then. It's nothing crazy with Chapman. Chapman doesn't get that much attention. I mean, he's starting to finally get more attention that he's deserved for the longest time, because people are starting to really understand how good he is defensively, and then people are starting to finally come around of how awesome he is with the bat, not just as a defensive wizard, but he is a reliable bat in the lineup that you want playing every single day. Right. So not only that, but go back to also your argument with the whole I guess like the Jeter A-Rod thing, because there's so many things that we could say about that whole debate. That debate would get very messy, especially when you post it on Twitter, because everybody has their own thoughts.
Well, at least with this one, people won't be in the least bit surprised. So at least if you post the video and it has a title of something with A-Rod and they see my picture on it, I think that they're going to pretty much know where this one is going.
But I guess where I was going with that was where you were saying, it's like, it's not because if I sit here and admit that Alex Rodriguez is better, because I think he was a better player in his career, and stats prove that he was, not just FWAR, but WRC plus or OPS or whatever stat you want to name off. That's not average. Even RBIs, people want to go to RBIs. Look at the RBIs. It wasn't even close. Right. A-Rod was so far ahead of him. He had the leg up. But I remember several times that I got heat on Twitter because I went out and claimed that Mookie Betts was a better right fielder than Aaron Judge. It's like, it doesn't mean Aaron Judge sucks, and it doesn't mean I don't like Aaron Judge. I'm a Yankee fan, for God's sakes. What do you mean? Why would I not like Aaron Judge? I have 2 jerseys of his, for God's sakes. They
want you to be a Homer fan. If you're not a Homer, then you're a fake fan. Mm-hmm. But that's basically what it boils down to.
I've just never been about that. Like, I've always been about that. Like, I don't care if the guy plays on the Red Sox. If he's flat out better than Aaron Judge, I'm going to say he's flat out better than Aaron Judge. And Mookie Betts, we can talk about the injuries too, because, it's becoming a repetitive thing with Judge. Obviously, I still want him in the lineup every day. I don't want him going anywhere as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely not.
But I'm also not going to sit here and say that, Judge is a better player than Mookie Betts is, because the stats just don't prove that. Both defensively and offensively, Mookie Betts has proven, also in a larger sample size, that he has been more productive than Aaron Judge. And it's not a knock to Aaron Judge. It doesn't mean I'm a fake fan. I'm secretly a Red Sox fan, in like the CIA headquarters or something. I'm going undercover, just to piss Yankee fans off. It's just the facts. I don't play favorites. I mean, I might be biased sometimes, but when I'm actually trying to take like an analytical approach and see who's the better player, I don't take sides. I don't care if you're on the Yankees. I don't care if you're on the Rays. I don't care if you're on the Orioles. I don't care what team you are in the league. I don't play favorites. I just go by what I see on the stat sheet. And I also watch, both of us watch these guys all the time. You're definitely a big, big, big fan of West Coast baseball, which
Yeah.
I am too. So I'm always finding myself just fascinated with watching like the Dodgers. I mean, how could you not help but like watching the Dodgers, especially for the last 3-4 years now, since basically 2017. Unless you're talking about Kershaw, because Kershaw's been exciting for basically since he came up in the league. And then now you have the Padres who, now they traded for Mitch Moreland, which is going to be like the strangest thing for me to get used to. The guy who likes steak and potatoes. And now, there might be a possibility of them getting Clevenger. The Padres are not playing around. I know Max would appreciate this, but, the Padres, along with the Rays, I would say, a lot of people don't want to hear me say this, but the Padres and Rays, when I think about the smartest front offices in the league, I think of the Padres in the National League, and I think of the Rays in the American League. And their farm systems are stacked. To be fair, the Dodgers are too. I do want to put Dodgers in that list too, because it seems like they're just crapping out prospects that, are proven immediately after they come out. I've been very thankful because I live in Oklahoma. So both the Dodgers minor league teams, their AA and AAA team, are both in this state. I live like 15 miles away from the AA team and like an hour and a half from the AAA team. So I really get to see firsthand what comes through and comes out of the Dodgers system. But, going back to the Rays and Padres, I just think they're the smartest team. And I think people are really starting to realize, I think people should have realized last year with the moves before 2020 started, before the 2020 season started, before spring training came along, with the winter meetings and all that the Padres weren't playing around. They've gotten a lot of good pickups that all these guys are getting on base. That's what they've needed. They strengthened their bullpen. Not only that, they're picking up more players now. They're not even done. We don't even know if they're going to get Clevenger or not. So it's just like, point is West Coast baseball, it's fun. Dodgers are fun. Padres are fun. Angels are fun, even though the Angels bullpen is just a colossal disaster. Honestly, their pitching is a disaster in general. It's a shame that I have to watch Mike Trout lose, 10%, or not 10%, the opposite of 10%. It's a shame that I have to sit there and watch Trout lose 80 to 90% of all of his games when he's playing so far elite baseball over everybody else that it's not even close. It's not even debatable who's the best player in the league. But the guy he can't win it on his own. As good as he is, he can't win it. It's kind of like you said with the whole Jeter A-Rod thing. A lot of people love to use the ring argument, and it's like, you do realize that baseball, if we're comparing every sport, every major American sport, football, basketball, even hockey for that matter. I know hockey is also a huge Canadian sport as well. Right. But still, it's huge in the States too. And the whole point is, as good as Trout is, he's not going to win every game for the team. Right. Even though Jeter was outstanding in his career, without a doubt, or he wouldn't be a Hall of Famer, he's not winning those championships just single-handedly.
And they went and got pieces that every team, they're like, oh, the Yankees buy championships. And it's like, all right, first of all, it's a business. Every team is paying players and trying to win. That's how you win. And that's what you win. You have a mix of homegrown guys. And then you have a mix of guys that you've acquired through trades. And then you have the guys that you sign in free agency. And that's how you win a World Series. Mm-hmm. Every single team that's won a World Series since the free agency became a thing, that's what they do. I mean, George Steinbrenner, he's the one who revolutionized free agent signings. Mm-hmm. He's the one who went and signed Reggie Jackson, and it was something that no other owner had ever done. Mm-hmm. So when people try to now act like as if Yankees are, all those championships are just based around, homegrown guys, it's like, no, George Steinbrenner revolutionized bringing in elite talent from other teams by waving a big check in their face mm-hmm. and luring them here. Mm-hmm. So, and with the West Coast games and the Padres specifically, not to be like one of those people like, I was saying that, but I was saying that when everyone was getting on, oh, Machado is just going to the Padres, he's just gonna go out there to die. No one's gonna hear, you're never gonna hear from him again. It's like, well, no, this move to me clearly meant that, like, okay, the Padres are ready to make some moves. Tatis, they were bringing him up. So now they went and signed the marquee player, the guy that they're going to build a championship team around, or at least a perennial playoff power. They're going to build it around Machado. So they had the farm system. Now some guys are starting to get older and they're starting to, look as good as they were expecting them to and predicting them to. So you know what? Let's go get the big guy in free agency. And they went and got him. And now look what's happening. They're getting this guy. They're bringing this guy in. So, oh, wait, we are hearing about Manny Machado every single day. I thought, Yankees Twitter told me that he was never going to be heard from again. But now look.
It's kind of like the same thing. Like, I'm so glad that, you like Machado, because I'm also a supporter of his. I think he's way better than what people give him credit for. They just don't like him because they don't like his personality, or they don't like what he did. They can't admit that he's a good player because of his personality, or da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, I kind of like the bad guys, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, definitely.
I like A-Rod. I like Machado. I like the guys that everyone else hates just because whatever. I don't give a fuck. I don't care if they're nice. Obviously this is barring if a guy's a total scumbag off the field. I'm not talking about like domestic violence or anything like that. I don't, when it comes to that kind of stuff, that does matter. But because Machado, other players in the league don't like him because they think that he's kind of a dick. Why would I care? Oh, the other players didn't like A-Rod. That's the other player's problem. Like, I don't give a shit. They're performing well. Why wouldn't I like them?
You could definitely also put Bryce Harper in that same list, because a lot of people
exactly,
hate on
and
Bryce
I love
Harper
him too
because he's the bad guy, and people want to call him overrated. I'm like, do you not see his numbers right now? He's playing one of the best, and people are like, oh, he's overrated because they don't think his contract's worth it. And I'm like,
and his career numbers. I literally just had this argument with someone today that it's like Harper's has elite career numbers. His sample size is over 8.5 years, and he's only 27 years old. So he's accomplished all this and he's put up elite numbers, and he's only now entering his prime. Guys like Harper, what works against them besides the Sports Illustrated cover when he was 16 is that he's so good that he was able to play at this level at 19 years old. How many players in the history of the game have done that? Besides, there's only a handful. And he did it, and he was able to be elite not even in his prime, in years that it would have been understandable if he struggled, but his struggle years were still above average years. And now he's only 27 years old. So people who are like, oh, he's overrated, he's not worth the contract. It's like, well, first of all, he's worth whatever contract he's given. This league, their little mini economy dictates their value. The market has dictated that he is this valuable. So he does deserve it. And it's also based on not only what they've already accomplished. So he has already earned the contract. That's how he was able to get the contract, because he's performed at such a level, but also because he's not even in his prime yet. So the Phillies know that the next probably 5, 6, 7 years are going to be possibly even better than what he's already done. And even if it's not, if he plays the same, it's still going to send him to the Hall of Fame. So anyone who says he's overrated, ask them. I just spoke about this on my podcast this past week. Ask them how they're valuing the player. Say, okay, let me hear what your valuation system is then. Crickets. They have nothing. And based on nothing. Just, I don't like him. That's what it's based on.
It's kind of scary that you also say that it's like Bryce Harper might not even be in his prime right now, because the one thing I can say that a player like Harper has done that, don't get me wrong, the one thing that Harper hasn't done that Trout has done is Harper's never put up multiple seasons with a 10 F-WAR or over, and nobody's gonna do that except Trout, because he's gonna be Trout. But still, on the flip side, in 2015, we were talking about, Bryce Harper isn't even in his prime yet as of right now. Still in 2015, the one thing that he did do that Trout has never done in his career is post a 197 WRC plus.
And he was only 22.
That is 3% off of 200%, meaning, compared to the average player, he's producing twice as much than the average player. And obviously, I'm not saying that makes him better than Trout. That's not what I'm saying. Trout is,
No,
even as good as Harper's been. Nobody's even close to Trout.
no.
It's just to paint a picture of people forget why he got that contract in the first place, why I think he deserves the contract in the first place, and why he could be even scarier moving forward. Because if he was doing that at such a young age, who knows what he's going to do? Basically learning more, knowing that what he knows now, growing with the game.
And he's a grown man physically now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when he was 19 years old, I mean, you're a man. It's like men aren't fully grown. They're not, it's like he's now becoming like a full grown ass man and entering his prime. Plus, what works against Harper, especially in the New York market, is that he's never left the NL East. So he's in our sports market. He's in our media market. So fans around here have been a hell of a lot more exposed to Harper than they have been to Trout. So with Trout, they've only seen his highlights. So it's like, oh, well, and I'm not saying, same thing you said, I'm not saying Harper is better than Trout. No one's better than Trout. But much like the Arenado and Chapman conversation, that's how good Trout is, that he is head and shoulders above Harper, and Harper is still head and shoulders better than a lot of the league. But we see him on the regular basis because he's playing the Mets all the time, and he's played at, his home stadiums haven't been more than a 5-hour drive from New York his entire career. So you're seeing everything about Harper, the good and the bad, and people only want to hold on to the bad.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, I think we covered quite a bit. I'm honestly very happy because, every time I do a podcast with someone, I'm always like, I feel like my anxiety is over the top in the sense that I try to think of possible questions so that it doesn't become dull, when in reality, every time I do a podcast, you go from one topic and then you just run to another topic, basically.
Yeah, I had the same thing when I first started my podcast, and even still now, that we'll keep a timer because my co-host and I will record, and so that way we know how long we've been recording, whatever. And when we first start, I'll look at the timer and I'm like, oh my God, it's only been 5 minutes. We're never going to fill the show. And then all of a sudden it seems like a finger snap later, we're like, holy shit, we're almost at 60 minutes. Like, we got to hurry up because we end up having so much content, and that's just how it happens.
Mm-hmm. And it's very, very, very good. And I will definitely put Emily's podcast in the description. You should definitely get it and definitely start listening to it because it is very good. Numerous people can tell you that. I can tell you that. I know Max can tell you. Max always does those breakdowns, which I love when Max does those breakdowns because
me too. I look forward to it every week.
He's literally on point every single time he does it.
And everyone, you can find my podcast at BreakBallsPod on Twitter, and we're available on basically all major platforms.
I have to ask you before we go ahead and hang up on this podcast, how did you guys exactly, the origins from the very beginning, how did you think of the podcast for Breaking Balls?
Just why did I start the podcast, or how did I think?
Like the name for it, because I think it's brilliant. It stands out from anything else that I've seen recently.
It's funny. My fiance and I, we were like, okay, we're going to do the podcast. We're going to do, you're going to do it. He's DJ Bingington. He's the producer and the engineer of the podcast. So he's going to push me to do it. So I'm like, all right, I got to think of a name. And then one night we were just sitting on the couch, and all of a sudden I was like, what about Breaking Balls? And he and I looked at each other and we were like, that's it, because of the double entendre, that it's obviously a pitch, but also, I've been called a ball buster at least more than once in my life. So it fit perfectly. It was just a no-brainer to pick that one. It just literally just came to me, the double entendre came to me. Obviously I've heard of Breaking Balls before, but I don't know. Nothing. I can't even tell you what sparked it. It was literally in the off season, just sitting on the couch during the lockdown. And I was just like, oh shit. It was like a lightning bolt moment.
Like catching lightning in a bottle type of scenario.
Yeah.
It's honestly so funny that you say that you're known as the ball buster on Twitter, because for people who don't know Emily, you should definitely follow her on Twitter. She's one of the more realistic Yankee fans, or more realistic just baseball supporters in general.
Thank you.
But she also posts some of the most hilarious tweets. Like, I swear more often than not, I feel like I'm replying to a tweet of yours and saying, you don't ever miss. You literally don't ever miss. You, like, every possible scenario where you could turn something into a joke of some sort,
Yeah, that's
it always succeeds. It's like a, what's his name, the comedian George Carlin. You know
yeah.
who that is? It's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of like that. Like, you don't miss. Like, I remember the first time that I like ever like heard who you are and why I followed you was because of that whole Estrada tweet, and I
Yeah.
was like, this is literally perfect. Like, this is a golden plus tweet. And then we got to the day and age where you got so popular that people started stealing your tweets. I bet someone stole your tweet that you tweeted today about Estrada. I guarantee
They
it.
did, because I. It's funny, you get birds everywhere. So anytime anyone has ever stolen a tweet of mine, uh, I'll have people message me with it. But this time, the person who stole it, they I don't know if I'd always been blocked by them or if they stole it and then blocked me right away, but they blocked me. So someone had to stop. I was like, wait, I don't know what it says. I'm blocked. They had to send me a screenshot. But the funny thing is that it was a paraphrase, and that's something that a lot of people do. They'll try to take something and they'll paraphrase it as if what makes the tweet funny isn't the way that it's worded. So when things will get paraphrased, it's just not funny anymore. And it's like, what was the point of that? Like, just retweet. Just retweet the tweet if you think it's funny. Like, come on. It's one of those things that, I'm flattered, because I tweet these things because I think they're funny. So I say, if I say something funny, it's because I think it's funny. That's why I'm saying it. So it's flattering that it's like this many people think it's funny too, and then someone thinks it's so funny that they want to take it and pretend that they said it. Like, imitation is the greatest form of flattery, as they say. So, and most of it is tongue in cheek. Like when those guys from Bronx Pinstripe stole something the other day, I wasn't really mad. It's funny. Like, okay, and it spices up the timeline then when you call out. But other people that are like don't have gigantic platforms like that, I would never be like, hey, you stole my tweet, because whatever. It's the internet. I'm putting it out there. So if someone takes it, that's a risk that I'm willing to take, to say something funny, I guess.
So is there anything else that you wanted to say? Because, we've covered a lot.
Yeah,
I'm
I
so
think that's
happy
it.
we finally did the podcast because I knew it was going to be golden from the get-go.
Yeah, me too. This is awesome.
So is there anything else that you want to talk about, Emily? Is there anything you want to get off your chest? Anything you want to advertise or anything like that?
No, just listen. Breaking Balls, we have a new episode every Saturday. Find us on Twitter at BreakBallsPod. Search Breaking Balls with Emily Nyman on all major platforms, and it's there. And my personal Twitter is at MSheDoesIt. That's EMSHEDOESIT.
And I will put all of her links in the description, both to her podcast and her Twitter. And if she has something else that you end up telling me in the DMs eventually, then I'll put that in there too. Just basically go follow her and go listen to her podcast, short and simple. I'm not going to say any more than that. I'm not going to spoil anything. But this has been Dillard and been Emily on podcast number 26. Hope all of you guys have a wonderful rest of your night, and we're seeing you guys later.